You bring part of yourself to every character, but some parts are closer to us than others.
From previously unreleased audio recordings, an unusually intimate new portrait of Hollywood icon Marlon Brando has emerged with the documentary Listen to Me Marlon. Many of the recordings were made by the star himself, who died in 2004.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender.
Brando won an Oscar for his performance in On the Waterfront, as he did for The Godfather. He had other memorable roles in films such as A Streetcar Named Desire and Last Tango in Paris. Brando's daughter Rebecca can remember him making the recordings, which are at the heart of this new documentary.
He had been recording into tapes since the 1950s, which I had not known of. However, going and staying, when I'd see Dad on the weekends or whenever it was, I'd see him recording into a little recording device, and he'd stop every time I'd come in the room, or anyone would come in the room. So we didn't really know what he was talking about. I think that it was very self-therapeutic for the most part.
With the approval of Brando's estate, a British filmmaker, Stephen Riley, was charged with putting together the documentary. Brando's well-known support of the civil rights movement and Native Americans is touched on in the film, but the tapes cover many aspects of his life, including personal comments on his approach to acting.
Hit him, knock him over, with an attitude, with a word, with a look.
I hope that the documentary goes a long way to humanize Brando, because I mean, and even my knowledge of him, sort of fairly scant knowledge before I started researching the film, included the fact that, you know, obviously I knew he was the Godfather, I knew he'd been in The Apocalypse Now and Last Tango and a lot of my favourite films, but there was a very ordinary and personable character behind all of that, who never wanted fame, who genuinely was a victim of his own success. I hope the film does a lot to bring him down to earth, which is where he wanted to be.
You made this documentary at the invitation of the Brando estate. Did you therefore at any time feel under pressure to perhaps paint a rosier picture of him than was perhaps the case?
I'd already written a proposal. I'd outlined the story, and it included a lot of the you know, some of the more difficult aspects, but they really endorsed the approach, and were very supportive in terms of supplying the archive, all of it completely, and only saw the film when the cut was complete and didn't ask to change anything.
When what you are is unwanted, then you look for an identity that will be acceptable.
Listen to Me Marlon is being released in art house cinemas this week, and it arrives with some very positive word of mouth and glowing reviews from festival screenings. One critic wrote that it's almost as if Marlon Brando himself had assembled this documentary from beyond the grave.
Well, I hope that's the case, actually. I mean, that's certainly an objective in a way. I mean, there was actually a lot of culling and rearranging, as you can imagine, from all that material to get it down into something that was, you know, sort of vaguely coherent. But I think the essence is you do feel like you're spending time with him, and that you're inside his thoughts and his head.
And the reason they don't have light in the theater is because you are there with your fantasy.
In his later years, Brando was beset by family tragedy and seen as eccentric and a recluse. His daughter hopes the documentary might change the way people view him. He was a man who had many human doubts.
Filled with insecurities and self-doubt and wanting to be a contender, always wanting to be approved and accepted and validated.
Marlon Brando himself seems to be an unwitting player in this documentary, but his daughter believes he possibly left the recordings as a hidden treasure, knowing something would be made of them.
Inferiority. I've been very close to it all my life.